your questions via the chat bar, which is located in your GoToWebinar screen. I would be happy to pose those questions to Paul at the conclusion of the session. So again, for any questions for Paul at the end of the session, please utilize your chat bar and send them to myself. My name is Sunny McCall, but I'm actually listed as Nat Dotson here in our system. With that said now, Paul, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sunny, and thank you everybody for dialing in, and for those of you that are in the Northeast today, I hope you're enjoying this beautiful, and I will quote, sunny weather. It is absolutely fabulous. Of course, across the country, the weather can't be any more different than the South and in the West, which is typical of the weather and which really illustrates the effect and the really the opportunities that we face in terms of being able to better manage how we react to the way that the weather impacts consumers. So what I'm going to do this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are, is give you an overview of the weather company. We're going to start with a short video, which hopefully will work via this platform. If it doesn't, then we'll just go right on past it. But I do want to show it to you because I think it gives a good overview of the weather company and what we're doing, and then how we view the world as it relates to integrating weather and data into the processes of businesses and organizations writ large. We'll talk a bit about the weather problem. We'll focus on what I'm calling here creating better outcomes, which is really the result of understanding how the weather is going to impact or has historically impacted an organization, and using those that information to move from insights to action. And then, as Sunny noted, we'll take some questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to go right to this video. Again, this is a description of the weather company. The weather company, for those of you that don't know, is the parent company of the Weather Channel and then weather.com and various other entities. And I thought I would give you a quick overview of how we view the world and how we view our mission, and we'll talk a little bit about the actual company and what we do. So here it is. Okay, so I think I've probably seen that same video 40 times over the last few months, but I dig it every time because I think it gives a really good and compelling overview of what we're doing, how we're leading in weather, and how we're helping companies and organizations really rethink how they use and leverage weather data. Just a brief sort of overview of the weather company. We are the world's best weather data and forecasting technology, and I don't say that lightly. It's measured by third parties in terms of our accuracy. We have the most precise weather forecasts, the most precise weather data. I'll talk a little bit more in detail as we go through the presentation. Of course, you know us from the Weather Channel and weather.com, but you may not know that we are integrated across local television channels all over the world. And I'll get a little more detail on that as we go through the presentation. And we're also the world's leading weather enterprise company. Most of the airlines in the U.S. have data from us or have our people working with them. We work with energy companies. I've noted before, we work with a large share of the local television channels around the country. So we've got a huge, huge footprint, and that makes a really big difference as it relates to our ability to process, because of the resources we have, weather data, and also to push forecasts out and put them and give them to people and businesses right at exactly the right time. I like to first start with sort of framing out the weather problem. And when we say the weather problem, of course, I've been in this business for a long time, probably at least the last 15 years on the business side of it. Prior to that, I was in the military as a weather forecaster supporting warfighters. But for the last 15 years, I've been working with companies across the U.S., Canada, and Europe on helping solve the weather problem. Of course, we can't change the weather, but we can certainly do a better job of managing the effect that weather has on our business. Now, this image that we're showing you now is the image from the snowstorm that hit Atlanta. And I use the term snowstorm loosely. Of course, it was only like an inch of snow, but it had significant bad ramifications across that entire metro area. And it wasn't that the weather forecasts that were bad. It's just that the forecasts weren't really integrated into a process that could be used to make decisions very quickly. One of the problems with weather data is in some ways there's too much of it. It seems like every other person is what my colleague Dr. Marshall Shepard calls a social meteorologist. So there's weather data everywhere, but the problem is you get what you pay for, and if the data is not integrated, and if you don't have a good sense from which the data is coming, it can be actually tremendously noisy and can cause tremendous amounts of confusions and problems. So that the fact that there is weather data out there doesn't really solve the problem. In fact, in some ways it makes it worse. And so the way that we're addressing it is by doing a few things, a few really big things, I should say, focused on both the precision, the accuracy, and the integration of the weather data. By doing that, and by connecting people and devices, and I'll talk more about that in a second, by taking the data that we're connecting the people and devices to and deriving actionable insights. And what that means is basically using the capabilities that we have now from a computing horsepower perspective, from a communications perspective, to understand how historically that weather or that weather forecast has influenced people and business, and then using those insights in a forward-looking way to create actionable actions that enable us to actually leverage the weather data instead of being victimized by it. So it's something that's been happening for a long time, but for a lot of reasons now, our ability to better manage and leverage the effect of weather is growing really, really exponentially. One of the things that's really helping in terms of our ability to better understand at a very local level what the weather is like, but also to be able to pull that data in to model it, is this proliferation of new technologies. So a lot of you may not know the fact that mobile phones now enable us to measure things like humidity and pressure, and that data is now mineable. And so if you think about how many people are walking around with smartphones, and the fact that soon we will be able to actually integrate that kind of data into forecasting models, again, this hyper-local level really gives you a sense for how much more information and more precise we're going to be. The airlines, as we speak, are sending us weather data from 30,000 feet. They're sending us data as it relates to wind and pressure at altitude, and also they're able to transmit down turbulence information in real time that we're able to process. And I'll talk about that in a minute when we start talking about case studies. Well, we at the Weather Company actually have a distributed network of over 140,000 personal weather stations. I personally have one in my backyard, which are weather stations that people have put up that are basically they're hobbyists or weather enthusiasts. There's many of us out there in the world. They put those up in their backyards, literally. We network to them, and as a result, we now have probably 100 times more coverage of weather sensors than most government, we should say all governments. And then finally, automobiles now are going to be smarter and actually have the capability to transmit information. So things like windshield wipers. Soon we'll be able to measure when cars' windshield wipers are on. We'll be able to measure temperature and pressure from cars. There's even talk about being able to measure braking and braking distance. All of that information is mineable and integratable into forecasting models. And really what you need to do to get to a more accurate forecast data is to be able to have that level of granularity as it relates to data, and to have the computing horsepower and the science knowledge to be able to sort of merge all of that together. So literally what we're doing here at Weather is that we're combining 151 different forecast models to create a very specific, bespoke forecast for all of our customers. We use what's called an ensemble technique, where we'll pull in all these different forecasts. These forecasts are all initialized at the same time, but the formulas that go into actually creating the forecast are slightly different. Forecasting the weather is a very, very chaotic, complicated endeavor. And small changes in the atmosphere, the proverbial butterfly flapping his wings in Australia, can throw off the forecast downstream. So the more data that you have, the more forecasts that you can process, and the smarter you are in terms of your ability to measure that using forecasting techniques, using artificial intelligence, and being able to go back and create these forecasts quickly enables you to get to a much more accurate and much better forecast. And that's what we do here at Weather. Just to put that into perspective, we've been doing this for obviously a long time. About 2 years ago, we released a forecast product that we call Forecast on Demand. And it's a really unique application of weather. What we do literally is, if you check the weather, for example, if you have an iPhone and you check the weather forecast on the native app on the iPhone, which comes from us, we will actually map where you are standing, and we'll create a weather forecast that is we'll create it in the cloud, no pun intended, at that real time, based on your existing location, based on the most up-to-date information and forecast models from all those things I just talked about, all the sort of Internet of Things data that's flowing in. And we'll create a forecast for you that's updated every 15 minutes, and it goes out by 10 days. So what that means is that we're able to create a weather forecast that is accurate, that is local, and it's specific to you. And that's something that we've been doing for, again, over a year. And we know from third-party measurements that it's the most accurate forecast that you can get out there. Now, the reason that matters, and the reason that the forecast factor matters, and I'll talk about size or reach here in a minute, is that many of us, I would say the vast majority of us, view weather through the lens of the weather forecast that we get on our mobile phone, that we check, by the way, several times a day at least, or that we get on television. And we plan our lives around that forecast. It's muscle memory. Most of us don't think about it. We don't wonder if the forecast is going to be accurate or not, because we just assume it's going to be accurate, because it is, by the way, most of the time. And so what that means is that the weather forecast is tremendously important as it relates to shaping consumer behavior. And that means that it becomes a very, very important insight into being able to anticipate, for example, if you are running a business, what your customer is going to be needing tomorrow or the next day or the day after. Now, in terms of size, or reach, I should say, the Weather Company, as I noted, is the largest commercial weather company in the world. And from a reach perspective, we reach 150 million unduplicated cross-platform consumers. We deliver literally to 1 billion mobile devices daily. So that's every iPhone on the planet, as well as on Android and most other sort of handsets. And we also deliver to 600 plus broadcasting stations around the world. So if you happen to be watching, I live outside of Philadelphia, and I watch Glenn Hurricane Schwartz, the data that he is providing may very well be coming from the Weather Company. It's just branded. It's not branded the Weather Company. So because I'm with the Weather Channel, as well as with the Weather Company, I always have to show videos. And I think this video is a great example of what I mean by the forecast factor. And it's with my friend and colleague, Jim Cantori. I think when you see it, you'll know exactly what I mean when I talk about the forecast factor. So let's see if this thing works. I love this video. Just like the other one, I've probably seen this 1,000 times, but it's such a great illustration of the point that I just made in terms of the importance of the forecast and how integrated it is into our daily lives. So imagine that what happened on that beach actually does happen every day. It happens multiple times a day, and you can see it happens certainly from a weather company perspective for at least 150 million cross-platform consumers, and it's available on over 100 billion, or I should say 1 billion mobile devices daily. So the weather forecast really matters, reach really matters, and the other thing that I think is most important is that the insights that you can gain from using analytics and pairing that with the forecast gives you some incredible visibility into how the weather is going to be shaping consumer demand, which obviously from a business perspective gives you what you need to begin to translate those insights into action. One of the challenges, I think, historically, and businesses by and large all understand that weather has a huge impact on their business. And we're not just talking about energy and agriculture, we're talking about retail companies, CPG companies, entertainment companies. Basically 30% of the entire gross domestic product of the entire earth is impacted by weather in one way or another. One of the challenges that businesses have had, and one of the reasons that it hasn't been integrated to the level that it is being integrated now and will be over the next few years, is that most companies felt that there wasn't anything they could do about it, or there was limited things that they could do about it, and that was pretty much true. We couldn't, and we certainly can't change the weather, but increasingly we're developing the technologies and the capabilities to be able to better manage the effect of weather. So what I want to do now is give you some examples of things that we're doing now at weather, and some of the benefits that we're getting from these applications. And I'll start with hail alerts. And basically what we're doing is that we're mining weather radar data. So when you're watching the weather on TV, hopefully you're watching the Weather Channel, and when you're watching a Doppler weather radar map and you see the greens and the reds all indicating where there's like really heavy rain or hail, we're actually mining that data, and we can see where hail is. We can actually see where hail is above a certain size. So in this case, we may be focusing primarily on hail sizes of an inch or more. What we do is that we basically triangulate based on the movement of that hailstorm. We see where it's going to go, and we work with insurance companies. Most of the major insurers in the U.S. use this in a white label fashion. And we send out a message to people that have insurance, the people that are insured with that company or have signed up for the alert. And that alert basically will say, hail's about to hit your house, go move your car in the garage. The alerts have been amazingly successful. This is something that's been live for about a year or a year and a half now, and we know from research that we've done after the fact, this is an amazing number, that about 50% of potential claim costs have been avoided in areas where we've had these alerts up and running. So that does two things. From an insurance company's perspective, it helps them obviously avoid a loss, so they don't have to make these payouts that they would otherwise have had to do. From a customer service perspective, their customers love them because they have created a new level of relationship that's really based on assurance instead of insurance. You go back to that video that we showed earlier with the car pulling in the garage before the hail hits there. It's really an amazing application, and I think it's a stunning example of the kind of technologies that we have now that allow us to do things that we would not even have thought were possible 5 or 10 years from now. On the retail side, again, this is something that we've been doing at Weather Company for a number of years now, using data and analytics to really understand, as I noted earlier, the effect that weather has on consumers, and then using that understanding to better time advertisements and to better time the content that goes into those advertisements, and to create advertising weather strategies that enables large insurance companies and the agencies that serve them to come up with really compelling geo-targeted, weather-triggered ads. And when this is done right, you can create a message to a consumer that is no longer an advertisement. It's a help to consumers. It's something that they value, and we've seen through work that we've done that we can help retailers get pretty significant increases in sales, up to 24% year-over-year lift in sales. And if you think about it, if you are, for example, a young lady who lives in a big city, and you wake up in the morning and it's a really hot and humid day, and you've got this is hard for me to give you this example, but I'm the best I can do. But you wake up with having a bad hair day, and you open to check the weather forecast, and it says, we know you're going to have a bad hair day. Oh, by the way, here's a coupon for a local drugstore, which is right around the corner, for you to buy shampoo that will help you deal with that. Those are the kind of things that we're doing. The actual analytics that we're doing and the results and the things that we're triggering are a lot more subtle than that example I just gave you. But it's something that is really, I think, transforming the way that, certainly from a seasonal product category and even not seasonal category, that advertisers are viewing the weather. So that's the demand side. On the supply chain side, companies for years have been using weather and using weather analytics, but they've been mainly doing it in more of sort of an anecdotal way. It's hard. It has been historically hard for them to integrate those insights into the way they run their businesses. But that, again, that's changing as well. As we get more sophisticated, we have more horsepower in terms of being able to actually process the data. Basically, what this means is that if you understand the historical relationship between sales and weather, and also if you understand the historical relationship between weather and consumer sentiments and people's moods, which is also a really powerful insight, you can do a better job from a retail perspective to make sure that you have the right inventory at the right time, at the right price, all the sort of the basic blocking and tackling of retail merchandising. And again, we've shown that out-of-stock reduction can be reduced by 10% as you go through and sort of apply those kind of techniques. This one is actually kind of near and dear to my heart. I just flew in last week from Vegas, from Vegas back to Philly, and as we're flying, the pilot came over the loudspeaker, and the flight attendants were, doing their due diligence in terms of handing out coffee and beers and things like that. And the pilot said, "There's going to be turbulence in 10 minutes. It's going to be pretty rough, so I'm asking everybody to sit down and put your seatbelts on, and once it's over, we'll tell you." Sure enough, I don't know if it was exactly 10 minutes later, but it was a short period of time after everyone had sat down, we got into some pretty rough turbulence. It was one of those days where the coins in my left pocket ended up in my right pocket. But no one was hurt. Everybody was strapped in because the pilots knew that it was coming. The reason, or one of the reasons that they knew it was coming, is that there's now real-time turbulence alerts that have been created. This is something that was actually created by WSI, which is the B2B part of the weather company. What these do, they basically radio down to the ground and to pilots that are trailing an existing airplane when turbulence is detected. It measures the turbulence in a very specific way and turns those observations into predicted areas of flight risk. This enables planes to either reroute or to, as I noted, tell everybody to sit down and strap in. And we've shown over the year or so that we've been doing this that it's resulted in a 50% reduction in crew injuries. So you can see that, again, another great example of how weather information tied with analytics and then built into an application that enables you to actually execute against that has real benefit. From an airport congestion perspective, again, I noted earlier that we're heavily into the airline industry here in the U.S. and globally. This is a technology that basically enables ground controllers to make better decisions in terms of where airplanes are parked and making decisions on how much fuel to load into planes and runway configurations. You can imagine the choreography that goes on the ground is almost as significant as it is in the air. And the precise weather forecasts that are now available to ground controllers has significant tangible impacts, in this case over $4.3 million in the study that we looked at, just in the area that we were focused on. From an energy and utilities load forecasting perspective, of course, weather is the primary driver of energy usage. The correlations between temperature and energy use is basically through the roof, especially in the peak seasons in the winter and the summer. More and more what companies are doing, certainly what we're doing, is we're translating weather forecasts, which is traditionally how energy companies have used weather information. We're translating those and doing the math to create energy demand forecasts. By doing that, it helps companies in terms of their generation planning, energy price predictions. And by the way, the forecasts that are done, certainly, well, let me rephrase that. The forecasts that we do through our WSI arm basically has a big impact on the price of natural gas and also the price of electricity. And it's really because the forecast is what drives the volatility in the prices. I've always thought that was really interesting as part of the whole term, the forecast factor that we use for our product, but I'm getting myself sidetracked. You can see, though, that the savings generated from this approach also is really sizable, and this is just really from the study that we did within the companies that we're working with. But I just give it to you as an example of the scale and the size of the benefits available here. And finally, with government and emergency management, of course, I showed you the image earlier of the cars on the highway in Atlanta. The reality is, and the challenge, I think, for emergency planners and emergency management folks is as it relates to the weather. There's just too much of it that is not really managed in a way that can sort of facilitate decision making. So what we are doing, we're doing very specifically and objectively, is integrating weather forecast information and analytics into applications that enable companies, emergency managers, I should say, to be able to make more informed, better decisions and more quickly, so they can react in ways that will avoid that gridlock that we saw in Atlanta about 1.5 years ago. One of the things I think is really cool about this whole sort of application is that there's weather data. Of course, we note on the slide the fact that we do a 15-day probabilistic tropical forecast, but also pulled into that whole sort of dashboard is things like social media data, like Twitter data, for example. And by combining high-resolution weather forecasts and weather observations with social media data, specifically from Twitter, emergency managers have a view into what's going to happen and what is happening on the ground like they've never had before. And the application here, and the important thing as it relates to action, is being able to pull that data into a common dashboard and be able to action or use it in a way that is process-driven and that enables them, again, to make better decisions quicker, which ultimately will enable them to quickly deploy critical personnel and assets for better response. Now, we note here on the slide a 1.5 days or so of extra lead time. I think that's probably the minimum. And then part of the reason I'm saying that the minimum is that weather forecasts are just getting better. And I know we get a black eye a lot in the industry, and I'm a weather forecaster, have been for 30 years, and if I had a nickel for everybody that told me I get paid for being wrong, I'd be a wealthy man. But the reality is, though, there's probably no other predictive element that you can get that's more accurate than weather forecasts. It's just that we all, as humans, only remember the last time it was wrong. It just sort of goes with the territory. So when you combine all of those things I just talked about. The ability to understand analytically and objectively how the weather has impacted your organization, whether it's a business or whether it's a government agency. When you're able to leverage really high quality, very, very granularly precise, down to that half a kilometer square grid point I noted, and when you're able to integrate highly accurate weather forecasts into business processes and technologies, it's going to help, and it is helping, and it's going to help a lot more as we go forward. Companies and organizations in general just be more effective and more efficient, which ultimately will benefit every single one of us. And it couldn't be happening at a better time, because as we increase our populations, as we have more and more people exposed to things like sea level rise, as we are seeing bigger impacts from smaller storms, hence the Atlanta storm that we're just referencing here, the ability to better manage and better operate under those sort of risky conditions is just a tremendous benefit for all of us, both in terms of how we're living our lives, but also in terms of the businesses and the economies that support us. So as you can tell, I'm pretty psyched about this whole thing. Oh yeah, one more thing. Always wanted to do this. We just announced last week that IBM has acquired the weather company. So everything that I just showed you, all of those examples of case studies where we've basically used weather data and analytics to help create additional value and additional benefit for consumers and for citizens, is, as we speak, going to be scaled across the globe, literally across the globe, and across many, many industries. So one of the reasons that I noted that while companies have historically known very well that weather is a big impact on their business, there hasn't been a lot done because there just hasn't been that many options for business to be able to take advantage of that. That's all changing. That's all changing in a really, really big way, in a way that I think is going to have a big impact on all of us over time. As the data gets better, the data gets more precise, and now we are able to partner. In this case, we're able to, the weather company, partner with IBM to bring to bear the resources that IBM brings, which are amazing and cutting edge. And I am extremely excited about it, as you can tell. And so, Sunny, I think, yes, that is my last slide. One quick commercial. We do have a blog that I contribute to. It's called forecastfactor.weather.com. That's available if you want to go visit. You can actually subscribe to it. We'll send you an email when we make new posts. And it's really focused on all the things that I just talked about. It's weather, how weather impacts consumers, and how different businesses are using those insights to make more effective decisions. So, Sunny, I guess I'll give it back to you and take any questions that we have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate it. And we actually do have a few questions. I'm not sure if you actually also have a slide you can put up there with your email address or contact details. I have actually already received a few requests for a copy of your presentation,
okay.
If you might be willing to make that available as well.
Yep.
Jumping right in, perfect. Thanks so much, Paul. Jumping right into the questions here. First question for you. Do you analyze impact of weather on social media activity? And if yes, how benefits do enterprises, if so, sorry, trying to read this question correctly here. If so, how do enterprises and companies benefit from this?
That's a great question. It's a really good question, and it's something that's obviously social media is still relatively new. I guess relative is all a relative in the day and age that we live in now. But yes, we do. In fact, of course, we work with IBM. We certainly work with IBM a lot, but IBM also has a partnership with Twitter, and so we actually have access to that data, and we are sort of collectively looking at Twitter data. And to use a term that's probably not very technical, but one I like, we are mashing up the data to identify how the weather is shaping the social conversation, and using that as an input in terms of understanding the playing field as it relates to not just sales, but also consumer demand and consumer sentiment. It's really amazing data, and I've done work on this in the past where if it's a colder than normal, or today in the Northeast where I am, where it's so unbelievably beautiful and warm, there's going to be just countless conversations about it, and countless conversations about how the weather is shaping somebody's behavior. There'll be people outside at coffee shops and people running outside jogging with shorts and t-shirts, and all of that information is captured in the social conversation, and it's all very, very valuable information to get that sort of bead on consumers, and really getting a real-time sense of how the weather is influencing how we're living our lives.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Another question for you from one of our attendees. On the demand side, this person is curious if local ads on the Weather Channel have been part of the process.
Yes, they have, in fact. We actually have a self-service platform right on the Weather Channel. And so we developed that specifically for small businesses. So small businesses can go on for very, very low cost and do they can advertise in their local markets based on weather conditions. They can create their own creative, and it's all self-serve. So it literally is going on, creating an ad message, and then basically toggling in the kind of weather conditions that are most advantageous for your business. And also on our site, weatherunderground.com, that's wonderground.com. You can go in and get historical weather data. It doesn't cost anything. You can go right in. You can get it at the hyper-local level. And what I suggest to small businesses is that they go, since they've got their own historical sales results, they can actually go in and they can download that data for free and determine, okay, what's the right time to be advertising, and then they can go right on weather.com and basically create an ad campaign. For it's not free, but it's very, very affordable for a small business.
Perfect. Another question for you, Paul. How do you consider the impact of climate change in the short-term weather forecast?
It really isn't considered at all in the short-term forecast. So the climate change is something that occurs over many, many decades. Well, of course, we do see the temperatures have been rising, over the last 100 years. Sea level are rising. All of those things are happening, but it's happening at a very, very slow pace. So the immediate impact isn't there. One thing, though, that I will say is that when you've got an extended period of abnormally warm or cold weather, in this case, and just to use the Northeast, for example, we're in a period now where the weather is incredibly warm. 70 degrees here in Philadelphia today, and it's November. Well, when we start to get into the second half of November and even into December, when the weather starts to become more normal, it's going to feel really, really cold. And it's going to feel cold. It may still be warmer than normal, but it's going to feel cold compared to what we've been collectively feeling. So the impact of that colder weather, even if it's warmer than normal, is going to be almost as if people are feeling winter-like weather. So one of the big things to consider when you're looking at weather, you're measuring it, and you're trying to understand how it's influencing consumers. The factors are what were last year's weather, or what was last year's weather, what was the impact of that on my business, and what's the weather been? What's the weather been for the last week or the last 2 weeks? And how will that impact my consumers? And once you sort of put those together, you can start to become very, very, in this case, very, very tactical, but very efficient in being able to react to those changes in the environment to maximize sales, really, and also be more provide more of a benefit to your customers at the end of the day.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for leading a wonderful session there. That concludes the Q&A portion of the session here. Any parting comments for the attendees before we wrap things up?
No, just thank you very much for dialing in. And if anybody has any further questions, Sonny, you can just send them to me. I'll do my best to answer them all.
Sure thing.
Yep.
One more question just came in right in the nick of time before we let you go.
Okay.
What are the current challenges and focus of your problem areas?
current? I just gave you a heavy sigh. I have to think about that. I'm not sure I understand the question other than as it relates to the integration of weather data into business processes. One of the historical challenges has really been literal business integration, being able to take information, weather information, translate that weather information into actionable insights, and then creating the action that needs to happen to be able to take advantage of that. That is the historical challenge, and that's the reason that weather information hasn't really been sort of integrated and scaled the way that it will be going forward in a very, very rapid pace. So I think that's, I guess the answer to that question is that has been the historical problem, but I see that we're going to be solving a big piece of that over the next few years as we bring to bear more technology and more horsepower, basically.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate your time here. This was a wonderful session, and thank you very much. Thank you so much, everyone who dialed in for our session, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.